Well, I want to talk not about the poo we're in right now, but about some, pooey, shitty situations that we've been in the past. The Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894, which is this is potentially a good fun story. There is a very important moral to it, particularly at a time like this. So how did we end up in a horse manure crisis? Some more numbers for you. In 1860, the city of New York, bustling city, gateway to America. In 1860, residents of New York took 35 million horse-led trips per year. So that's not just privately going out on your horse. All of the public transportation systems, and they did exist in New York in 1860, they were horse-drawn trams, horse-drawn carriages. So 1860, there were 35 million a year. By 1870, that number had more than tripled to 100 million trips per year. By 1880, there were at least 150,000 horses living in New York, and probably a great many more that we didn't even necessarily know about. And each horse, for those who want to get a bit technical, releases between 10 and 30 pounds of manure a day, average 22 pounds, which is 10 kilograms, for those of us who prefer kilograms as a measurement. So you've got at least 150,000 horses dropping an average of 10 kilograms of manure every single day, 45,000 tons of horse shit every month. And this wasn't just something that was limited to New York, of course. Every major city, having had the wave of urbanization that came from the first industrial revolution, was experiencing this crisis. So the reason we call it the crisis of 1894, that's when it got particularly bad. We drew a lot of awareness to it in London. So the Times newspaper in London in 1894, they made a prediction that in 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of manure. In New York City, they had a 40-year outlook, 1930. Horse manure would reach the level of Manhattan's 3rd-story window, so it was going to be even deeper on the island of Manhattan. The world's first urban planning conference was held in 1898. It was held in New York, and it was actually held for the specific reason of discussing the horse manure crisis. What could cities do in terms of urban planning to manage what was, based on 1860, 1870, 1880, forecasting all of that forward, what was going to be an extraordinary amount of horse shit that they'd have to deal with. The conference was slated to run for 2 weeks. It got cancelled after 3 days. The conveners recognised that there was no solution in place. So there's no point even having the conversation anymore. So what can we take from that? Because you might realise that by 1930, there wasn't a whole lot of horse manure in New York City. 50 years from 1894, that was 1944, that was the middle of the Second World War. I mean, the Blitz was pretty terrible in London. It wasn't exacerbated by 9 feet of horse manure on every street. The problem got solved, and the solution was, if you haven't guessed it already, the invention and popularization of the automobile. So within a generation of this crisis, there were more cars on the streets of New York than there were horses. And the horse manure problem had been replaced by emissions from cars, which, as we know, of course, have absolutely no consequences and nothing we need to worry about. So what's the moral that we need to take? Well, the first is that right now there's going to be a lot of forecasting. And there's a lot of forecasting that is going to be based on fairly short-term 3.3 million jobless claims, 6.6 million jobless claims. Does that mean next week it's going to be 12 and a half, 13? Is it going to be 26 million the week after? Rather than looking at the bigger, longer picture, which is a key part of the conversation we have in our economic chats. So a lot of forecasting, just like the Times of London in 1894, is, frankly, utter horseshit. It could point to the fact that change is hard to predict, and that is absolutely true. I've been pushing back a lot on Twitter recently about people who say that this pandemic is a black swan, because it's not. A black swan is something that is not just unpredictable, it is literally unable to be predicted. And there have been a lot of people predicting the next pandemic, certainly a lot of people like myself predicting the next recession. So to say that this was unprecedented, unpredicted, is to suggest that we couldn't have done anything different. The reality is, as businesses and as nations, we need to go, what could we have done differently, even with the information we knew? We didn't know that it was going to be a coronavirus mutation that caused this, but we knew something was going to happen. The most important moral I see for the horse manure crisis of 1894, and I'll say that one last time, is that often when we are stuck in a problem, it seems impossible to solve because we're thinking of that problem through the wrong lens. We're looking at it often from our past experience, and we're bringing that past experience into this problem we've created. And of course, we're not seeing the future solution because we need to come at these problems very differently. So nobody sitting in that convention in 1898 in New York thought that automobiles were going to be the solution for this problem. That was something that was being solved outside of the experts who were tasked with solving this problem. And similarly, for your message, for your business, there is a solution for the challenges you are facing. It might not sit in front of you. It is unlikely to be something that you have done in the past. But don't let that make you feel that no solution exists, because history has shown us time and time again that we are an ingenious species, that ingenuity will kick in, and that there are solutions coming for the pandemic, there are economic solutions, and more specifically for the challenges you face in your business right now, there are solutions out there. They just don't look like what you were doing in your business 6 months ago, 2 years ago, heck, the annual plan you maybe set in January. Your business isn't going to go back to the way it was. We're not going to go back to a world pre-pandemic, pre this recession. We never do. You can't go backwards in time. The future of your business is going to look different to the past of your business, and the sooner you let go of some of that past and start thinking of the future, the sooner you're going to be able to do some of the strategic things that you need to do. Here are the 4 things that I see that every successful business is going to have to transform between now and the release point, the execution phase of this recession, which is probably the second half of 2021. You need to plan to transform your client base and how well you know them. You need to transform your product, which may be the packaging, the pricing, it may be something even more fundamental. You need to transform your sales and your marketing strategy. What people are looking for, the way they buy is going to shift. The message you give them, how you get cut through, how you get conversion rates is also going to shift. And you need to transform your team members, which could be capability, it could be efficiency, it could be that this helps you realize there were some of your team members, as we discussed last week, that this is actually a blessing in disguise, that you can actually shift them out.